you think that counts as his video going away?
I don't know. I can still see him smiling at me.
Yeah, I think that does qualify, maybe.
I'm going to guess that we're live. Welcome to another episode of Connect This. We're in episode 13, which makes it the 14th episode because that's how we roll, because we're counting zero. This is an episode that's going to be fun. It's one that's been pushed upon me by Reid, who insisted that it was necessary. And I'm really excited to talk about this stuff. We're talking about middle mile and Roman numeral 9, the best Roman numeral, IX. We have Reid Fishler. I said that right, actually. The director of seniors at Hurricane Electric and board member of MICE. Welcome, Reid.
Hello.
Tell us quickly what Hurricane Electric does.
Hurricane Electric is the largest backbone provider for internet services in the world. We are on all 6 inhabited continents with 100 gig rings all around the world. And basically, we are the middle mile provider for the internet for all intents and purposes. Excellent.
We'll talk about MICE when we get into the discussion in a little bit. But first, I want to introduce Fletcher Kittridge, the OMG founder of GWI FTW. Welcome to the show, Fletcher.
Thank you. Good to be
Fletcher,
here.
You've been on the community broadband bits. Love talking with you about all manner of things: last mile, middle mile, extra mile. Who knows? But tell us, for folks who aren't familiar, what is GWI?
We're an internet service provider. We've been around for over a quarter of a century now. We provide service in Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. We work. We do a lot of fiber, and we work with municipalities frequently.
I was going to say, people probably recognize you from that partnership with Rockport.
Yeah, well, that was, at its time, it was a good start. And
it's still exciting. They're building on it. It's terrific. Yeah. But you're in Islesboro. You're in a bunch of places in Maine with municipal fiber. So we've written about.
Right. We're also doing more and more in Vermont, which has got a big municipal fiber industry.
Good deal. And we also have Travis Carter, who every time something cool happens on Reddit where people start talking about how great he is, he sends it to me. So I tweeted it out last night.
I'm just trying to represent us non-community owned networks, to keep them at your forefront. So every now and then I make up a post and send it your way. So
yeah, last night, Travis, was it last night or was it 2 nights ago? It's all run together.
I think it was last night. Yeah, we had a nice thread on Reddit, so I had to send it over to Chris, and he nicely retweeted it. I guess I should join Twitter one of these days, huh? So I can see what you tweet. I might be the last person on earth that doesn't have one.
And then I am Christopher Mitchell, Moderatus Extraordinatus is what I've decided today for my introduction. I'm at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance in Minneapolis. I run the Community Broadband Networks program, and I thought this would be a fun idea. And Travis has convinced me it is a fun idea. So
you're amazing at it, just so you know.
We have an opening question, and that question is creating a small rural ISP far from an internet exchange easier or harder now than it was 10 years ago? So I'm gonna ask you that, Travis, first.
Oh, shoot, I was hoping to go third. So 10 years ago versus today, I'm not sure how much what I perceive as the number one issue is if you want to upstart a small rural ISP, which is how do you get communication and connectivity out of your community? So if I were to upstart in a small town in Minnesota and the only long haul provider I had was the incumbent cable company or the incumbent phone company, they might take my business year 1. Year 2, year 3, but I bet as I start to erode their business away, my opportunity for that connectivity is going to disappear. So I would say it would be very difficult to start up in a rural community with very limited carrier neutral, for lack of a better term, long hauler providers.
All right, Reid. I'm going to let Travis skate on the 10-year comparison, but I expect to have a very good analysis of the 10-year difference.
Well, I'm going to actually split on this one. I'm going to tell you that it's both harder and easier at the same time. I think that 10 years ago, we were splitting on the very back end of dial-up, if you're talking rural, and low-level DSL. So at some point in a rural area, you could have gone with somebody, assuming they were somewhere in your region, with somebody who may have had DSLAMs that you were able to get into. So that was a little bit easier. Nowadays, that doesn't exist. I don't think that was a great option, but it was there. Now, of course, you have more options to connect. However, it is much more difficult because in many rural areas, I'm sure Fletcher will talk about this, there are swaths of the United States that middle mile has completely ignored. And basically everything north of Boston is completely, for the national players generally, is completely ignored. So that's a great example of how it's difficult depending on where you are.
And Reid, I'll just ask if you don't mind muting yourself when you're not speaking, just to deal with a little bit of that noise. Fletcher, go for it.
I thought you were going to complain about the roosters, but they've been quiet. I would say that's a huge, complex question. You didn't see.
That's why I give you 30 seconds.
10 years ago, I don't think there were very many rural ISPs starting up. What I notice now, at least in our area, there's a lot. And I think you'd want to say what type of ISP. And if a facilities based, pull your own fiber type, which is I hope the only types that are starting now. I think it's far easier. And I think we're seeing the resurgence of the small ISP, rural ISPs in a way that dates back to the very early days of the commercial internet. I can't speak, it's a big country. I don't know where, in parts of it, where there is middle mile fiber or not, but in the parts that I'm used to, there's a lot out there. And it may not show up on north of Boston, I think of Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine. They just have all the middle mile fiber you'd want, or it's in the process of being laid down. So now all the things that you didn't have, this is capital intensive. That's the most important thing. There's enormous amounts of capital available. I mean, people are willing to invest in the internet. And you pull in rural fiber, you get private. There's enormous amounts of government money washing into it. Now, these days, the thing that is in short supply is, because all this capital is washing in, is expertise is really in short supply. And so, I mean, that will be, finding staff will be your hardest problem. And unfortunately, even though this stuff is no more complicated than it was in the early internet, this stuff is easier than modems. Fiber is a lot less complex than dial-up modems. But the problem is the capital is going to come to people who don't have a chosen track record. So it's hard to bootstrap yourself up. But I think there's a plausible story, and some set of people will convince someone to give them the money, particularly if you work with institutions who are around for a while, like a municipality. So my expectation is we're going to see a lot of small rural ISPs start up over the next, or starting up now, are going to be starting up over the next 10 years. And I notice competitors to us, small competitors to us, are popping up like mushrooms after heavy spring rain.
So that question went in a direction that I didn't expect. That was really, I think, really good for the analysis of what's going on. I was thinking just purely in terms of middle mile, and This is something that I've talked to Reid about. So this is my sense is that in some places, I think we've lost middle mile effectively over the past 10 years with the consolidation that we've seen. And so if we just look at the ability to project traffic back, to get to an IX, is it harder now? And obviously it's going to vary based on where you are.
I think there's fiber out there that people don't know about.
Okay, Reid?
You know what an IOU is? An IOU,
an IRU?
Investor-owned utility.
Oh, investor.
So those
utility.
are the,
I thought you were
those
talking about indefatigable right of use.
Well, 40% of the U.S. is not served by an investor IOU, investor-owned utility. They're served by co-op electric company. One of the things about what makes electric companies interesting in this discussion is they pull lots of fiber, because fiber's dielectric. It's a glass. It's an insulator. Dielectric doesn't collect. So they can do signaling without worrying about shorting stuff out and frying stuff. So, and those co-ops are really interested in getting broadband too. And they would be delighted if someone popped up and said, I'm going to do, because they probably partner with you. They may even be a conduit of money. They may try to buy you.
Fletcher is feeling optimistic today.
Yeah, excuse me. And those rural areas tend to be where the co-ops are. There are lots of other people. There's states that have pulled massive amounts of fiber, in Vermont or Kentucky. So this is a very, very local. I mean, the very nature of what we do is it's where the virtual world meets the physical world. So it's a very location-based.
Okay, I want to bring Reid into it.
Go ahead.
I think that what we should do, because I think, Fletcher, you and I have a different definition of what middle mile is.
Okay.
So I think it's very important that we define what middle mile is, because I think you and I agree that there's a lot of the fiber which you define as middle mile, I don't define as middle mile, that exists. Middle mile to me is the connection between a NFL city, usually an NFL city, does not need to be an NFL city, but an aggregation point for internet. So a telecom hotel to a local network of some kind that is doing the drops to the customer locations.
So we're talking about Cleveland, not Columbus.
Well, we're talking about stuff like Portland to Boston, Portland to Chicago, and I'm talking Portland, Maine. We're not talking about the stuff that goes across the state and inside of Vermont and the like. I wish there was an IX in Vermont, New Hampshire, working towards it, getting there. But I'm talking more about middle mile as how to get from the municipal network that's built to somewhere where you can buy internet at a reasonable rate, whoever it's from.
Okay. Well, there are lots of places. So I understand Hurricane Electric has a certain view of the world. And for what it's worth, we are, I'm not sure if we are now, but in the past, we've been off and on a customer of Hurricane Electric. And we might very well be now. You got to get a reasonable price. And you're probably going to want as you get even a little bit bigger, you're going to band together with your other small rural ISPs and the local college and the local university or whatever, and try to get dark fiber. So for me, middle mile is dark fiber, because otherwise you're paying through the nose. You do ultimately want to pay Hurricane Electric, but you don't want to get them. You don't want to pay them for that. You want to pay them at the place. You don't have to get to an NFL city to get. I mean, if I look at the big connection points that we go for, we do go to Boston, because we're essentially in the part of Maine I'm in, we're a suburb of Boston. But the big places in the rest of New England you want to go to are Springfield, which is a major intersection point, so you can get cheap broadband there, or Albany. So I think they're probably a good 100, 150 other places outside of NFS city where you can pay if you pay a premium, it's a small premium to what you'd pay. And the port cost when you get to your exchange point, the cost of the port, the cost of the bandwidth is so much lower than what I think of as the middle mile, which is from your last mile network to where that exchange point. It's usually what kills you is the interregional transport. But if you were in Ohio, I bet if you got to Columbus or Cleveland or Cincinnati, or Kentucky, I'm not sure what it is, or it really depends. But there's a lot of stuff out there that just doesn't show up on the radar screen.
Okay,
that
so
if you go ahead, all right.
I'm gonna jump in. We're gonna pick this up in a second because we steamrolled right into the interesting part of the conversation without doing the little game that I like to play.
Okay.
Travis, I'm gonna knock your socks off with this one. I bet that you knew that this was gonna come.
Here we go. Let's see.
Sooner or later. Let's see if I can get this right. Oh, screen 2. There we go. All right. What do you make of this?
I know what that is. That's our wireless network. That's an easy one. So what this is a hot. So what USI does is we have we use a Cambium product, and we provide wireless in certain areas where we have not built our fiber to yet. And so this was one of our incarnations of everything. And so this one here has Wi-Fi, it has Cambium TDD access, and also does wireless backhaul. This was our motivation for putting fiber in the ground was to consolidate and get rid of all of these flat panel antennas. So that is what this is. Is this near your house, Chris?
No, this is, I was heading over to Riverview Theater to pick up some popcorn to support the theater. And
so actually that will get dismantled this year and get replaced with a fiber backhaul.
So
wireless works fairly well if you have a wireless or if you have a fiber backhaul.
So what are we looking at? What are the flat antennas?
North, south, east, west backhaul. Basically they hop between each other, between the poles. And then you have your omnidirectional antennas on the top, both in the 4.9, 2.4, 5 gig. Oh, it's got a little bit of everything. And if any of you that have ever played with RF, trying to get this all not to self-interfere with itself was the magic. So that is what that is.
Any questions, Fletcher, that I should ask him?
I just a comment. I bet it's a fine day when you replace your multi-hop wireless backhaul with fiber.
Oh,
sweeter.
Yeah. I loved your statement of all networks now should be built fiber only, because I'm not a huge wireless fan, but if you are a access point attached to a fiber network, it is not bad. It is not fiber good, but it is not bad. If you try to start doing multi-hop wireless, like I'm waiting one day for you to bring a Ricochet picture up, Chris, next time you're down in Shakopee. This was the 5G of the day back then. I mean, this was the greatest thing since peanut butter and jelly. So, and with anything with a wireless backhaul, not good.
Yeah.
All right. So before we go too far, I do want to come back to the middle mile, but I also want to talk about the IXs. And so an internet exchange, Reid, why is it important? Because whenever you and I have talked about middle mile, you've come back to this issue of well, we need to talk about internet exchanges also. And I also want to say one other thing before you answer that, Reid, and that's that Reid does work for Hurricane Electric. One of the reasons I want to have Reid on this show is because the people that come on this show are people who are like lifers, like that they believe in something and they're going to be doing something interesting, and they work for places, and they're not going to say things that that even if their company's wrong, they're going to be quiet rather than speaking up and saying something that's wrong. And so I just wanted to say that, Fletcher, you made a comment about Hurricane Electric has a point of view. I think that we should attribute the views in this to Reid, and so and I'm not saying you were saying that to slam him. It wasn't an insult. It was just like an observation you made, but I want to make it clear. Like like Travis, just speaking for Travis,
But if you're in the business, hammer business, and what you happen to sell is the highest grade, high quality commercial jackhammers, it's different than the hammers for a finished carpenter.
Yeah, no, I think Reid would agree with that. And I just want to say that I don't want to spend a lot more time litigating. I've already spent too much time trying to make a deal out of it, trying to avoid making a deal out of it, making a deal out of that. So Reid, IXs, what does that have to do with middle mile? Like, how are they related?
Well, the best thing I can say is I'm sitting in New York right now. I'm sitting on Long Island, which the best example could be Hurricane Sandy. When Sandy came in and wiped out all the connectivity to and from New York, there was no ability here in Verizon / Cablevision, which is now Altice, but whatever, we can talk about that. But there was no ability for those two networks generally to talk to each other. And basically an IX, the main thing it serves is to keep traffic local. Travis can speak to this about mice. Fletcher, you know about any IIX in Portland. These are basically large Ethernet switches to really dumb it down to keep traffic between the guy who controls this town, and I don't mean controls as in any business sense, but who has the majority in this town, and the guy who has the town next to it, so that somebody in Maine doesn't need to send that traffic all the way back to Boston or Albany or Springfield or Montreal or wherever. It could stay in Maine and go between those two networks. And there's no reason why he needs to pay a transit provider to send traffic between those two either. That should be free traffic between those two networks. And an IX, anywhere in the world that it is, serves that purpose. And that's a really succinct way of putting it.
And we have far fewer of them than people realize.
Yeah, and there are other two key points if you're lucky that you can find sometimes in an IX. The first is it can be a place where you can buy bandwidth, and you may have many more choices for buying bandwidth because it's well connected, and choice drives down price markedly. The other is, in some circumstances, you can end up in a situation where the content caching is there, and that can massively cut your the amount of bandwidth you have to buy if the big content caching people start locating in that IX. You end up having to buy far less bandwidth.
You could even go further than that, and in the largest of IXs, including mice, the content guys actually are there. There's not even caches, so you can get to that level as well.
And when you say buy bandwidth, it's kind of interesting. At that point, you're talking about interconnection, right? I mean, when you say buy bandwidth, like to some extent, buy bandwidth, you can buy different switches and you have more bandwidth, hey presto, internally. But you're talking about moving traffic from your network onto other networks, right?
Yeah, your default route. I mean,
okay.
you got to have a fallback. Unless you're the very biggest people, at some point you need to and you won't be if I understand your target audience. At some point, you're going to have to buy a couple. Well, I mean, you got to be a tens of billions of dollar company before you're going to get everybody to pair with you. And there are only a few companies like that in the world. You're going to end up having a default route from multiple people, and you're paying for that. But if you can figure out a way to get most of your traffic, you don't pay for going over that default, the default route, then you're not paying for it, and you really cut your costs.
The simple way I like to say this when I talk to my mother is,
I love you.
Well, yeah, besides that, and I won't talk because I think she's watching. But nonetheless, I will say is when you're not watching Netflix, when you're not watching YouTube, and you want to FaceTime with your aunt or uncle or whatever, 700 miles away, that traffic is directed by me. Everything, all of your other local traffic generally maybe caches or something else. But when you want to go and see something and you want to talk to something that's not Anycast and that's Anycast, not multicast, that's what that's really what we do. But that's what that traffic that we're talking about to buy traffic is.
And we had a question from someone who asked, so is that tier 1? Are you a tier 1 provider? What's the difference between the tiers?
The tier system is completely obsolete. Tier system used to be when the US was the center of the internet, and that was it. And there was no other choice. Now, because the internet is so all over the place and it's all throughout the world, everybody pays somebody for some sort of traffic exchange. I won't go into the specifics, but everybody who you might think of as tier 1 has some sort of exchange of whether or not they pay money or fiber, or they have some sort of side agreement or something similar. there are no more tiers. It's generally just sort of those who are ranked at the top, and it doesn't matter the ranking, but Renesas used to do a ranking. A lot of the sites do a ranking, top 8, top baker's dozen, or in that area, and then you get to the next level. And it doesn't really matter who you buy internet from, as in whether or not it will work. Generally, you buy from who you want. You buy from, if you want all your traffic to go to China, you buy from a Chinese provider. And if you want all your traffic to go generally, you buy from a large provider. If you that's it, it's all food. It just matters what kind of appetite you have.
I feel like Fletcher has a qualifying statement. Then I want to hear what Travis is thinking about.
Susan, I just said cogent.
You're having a cogent thought?
No. Cogent is an internet provider that's
has not yet been purchased by one of the legacy telephone.
It's not been purchased and is inexpensive and is known for. Oftentimes, you can't reach parts of the internet from it.
Oh, so it's classic Maine then. You can't get there from here.
Yeah. Though they're a big multinational company.
I know.
Yeah, and anytime you buy one of these, you're gonna buy more than one. Usually, we're a small provider, and I think we have
tens of thousands of subscribers.
At least three at any given time.
And you have tens of thousands of subscribers? Is that
under 10,000?
Okay.
We've become primarily a business subscriber, though. We expect that to change over the next couple of years.
So, Travis, what are you thinking about from this conversation? What should folks know, or what questions do you have?
Well, okay. So the way we approach it is we approach it kind of from the user experience standpoint. And so what we try to do is put a little stack of connectivity together, and it includes all the pieces we've talked about. So what we try to get is local cache. So like Netflix and Google and things like that. These are actually physical servers running on our network. So when you watch the new Netflix episode, you're literally just going to a computer attached here in Minneapolis. Then our next step is PNIs. These are private connections, and these are into the big content guys, Google, Facebook, Apple. There's a myriad of them. Then followed by the internet exchanges. In our case, it's Mice and Equinix and KCIX and a bunch of other ones. And then lastly, we get to the transit providers, which would be like Hurricane, Cogent, NTT, Atelia, and the like. So if you put this little sandwich of connectivity together, the net result is the user experience. If you use your most picky users, which are gamers, will tend to get the lowest latency, lowest ping experience, because they're as close to the content as you possibly can get. So that's our constant exercise, is to get more and more direct connections to content. And if we don't have them, then Reid handles it for us.
I was just speaking today with two folks that do a lot of work in Canada and have been banging their head against the monopolies up there. And we're talking about how they've done a lot of work to try to educate people about latency and stuff like that. And they had these people came in and more or less convinced people that 100 millisecond latency was as good as it gets. You can be like playing games, you can do all kinds of stuff. And I was like, my God, like if I had been up there and been arguing that, I just would have picked like a random selection of like 10 or 15 people off of any gaming server and ask them, like find a Call of Duty server and just ask them, hey, what's 100 milliseconds do for you? Because they know, right? Like these kids know.
Well, business people are funny. When you tell them that you designed your network to satisfy gamers, they think you're crazy until you tell them, well, do you have a gamer in your house? And literally 9 out of 10 people do. And what does 20 millisecond ping reduction in your gaming experience mean to you? And the kid lights up. That's a big deal. I'm too old, slow for it to matter anymore. But, back when I was young and, it probably would have made a difference. So.
Easy question. Is there a resource that maps or identifies exchanges in the U.S.?
That's an easy one.
Yeah.
That's I answered it in the chat as well, but that's PeeringDB.
How come I haven't seen it? What's going on here? I don't see your answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
So
it's PeeringDB.com.
Yeah.
Yep. That will answer all the IXs, as well as for the other question that we talked about with Fletcher and talking about major buildings, which I agree with you, by the way, is you could look up all the major buildings in the world on PeeringDB. So the Albanys of the world, the Springfields of the world, and the Bostons of the world, and the Portlands of the world will all, or should all, be on PeeringDB.
So I want to talk about California by way, or I want to get back to Maine and lessons that I've learned, but I want to talk about California because they're talking about putting, I don't know, $6.5, $7 billion, something like that, into robust open access middle mile. And let me just start by asking the question of, I feel like you have a range of choices in terms of what you do with IXs across the entire state of California if you're building massive middle mile. One extreme would be that you have one IX in Sacramento, and then another one would be that you have one in every single regen hut. How do you decide what the appropriate amount of IXs are if you're building that kind of a big fabric to enable lots of local community networks and that sort of thing? And is that even the right question to ask? Reid, I feel like I'm going to ask you to lead that off.
Let me just comment that I'm not intimately familiar with what is currently happening in California.
Yeah, I don't think anyone is. So you're on safe ground.
Okay.
It's still early enough.
But I can say that limiting, usually when government picks an IX, it doesn't go well. And I'm not going to rehash things that I've dealt with in the past, but there's been a couple that I've dealt with where it takes so long for the IX to be formed and the organization and all the structure that somebody just goes, plugs in a switch, plugs people in, and everything goes around sideways because people end up going to the guy who just did it rather than trying to form everything.
No, that's very much in keeping with our attitude here. So I appreciate that. Yeah.
But by the same token, I think it is very important when we're talking about how to foster interconnect, that if we talk about going to areas that are underserved, that we talk about looking at examples like what the U.S. government has done with airline service, where the U.S. government goes out and funds various programs to help airports and routes, essential air service, and actually gives money to make sure that flights are flown and that airports stay alive. And even though at some point there is a certain amount of pork to that, there is definitely a use for this, and there's definitely something that you can see with broadband, where what we should see is large amounts of local municipal areas that are fostered with various programs grouped together, and a carrier hotel or an aggregation point be put into some place that is either run by a municipal network in a carrier neutral fashion, or is run by government if there is nothing else in a community college, police station, city hall, whatever. But find some place to aggregate a general areas network together, and you will make it so that that area can operate autonomously going in the future. Because I remember the day, Travis, when we were talking about Minneapolis being basically a slave to Chicago. And those days are gone because Minneapolis stood up, and whether it be by mice or by 511 building or anything else, Minneapolis now has personality of itself, as does Kansas City. And that allows for people to build to those places. And that's what we need to see. We need to see Maine, and it is doing it, but we need to see Maine do this. We need to see Alaska do this. We need to see all of the areas stand up and be their own network rather than being just hung off of whatever their nearest large city or et cetera is.
And for all of our fans in Hawaii who are watching us live right now, every last one of them, there's money in one of the broadband bills right now that actually will establish carrier neutral landing facilities, because they're having a problem on the islands with exchange points that are owned by carriers, I guess, and they don't have the ability to exchange traffic on island. So there's actually money that is dedicated just for that in one of the bills I was going through. Now, Fletcher, let's talk about. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I can speak that for Honolulu, there's an excellent, for Oahu, there's an excellent exchange that's not owned by a carrier. I know that there is a problem getting from the landing to the IX, and that's probably, I heard that the rumor a year ago that this was going to happen. It's probably for open access from the landing to the IX itself. But I didn't see it, but that's.
Reid, you had an excellent point though about just some guys setting up an Ethernet switch and starting an IX. I mean, look what Jay's done down in the Quad Cities. He just literally a year ago started, and now it's starting to get a personality already without a big, government bureaucracy getting involved, and people are wanting to get there now.
So it sounded like it was two parts. One is that they're going to pull a lot of middle mile fiber, and the other is potentially establish exchange points.
I just made up the exchange points part.
Okay,
yes.
the exchange points. I think the government ought to concentrate on the fiber, which is a long-term investment, and there's a lot of technology in fiber. It's a piece of glass, but it's hard to do in a government doing it, and it's capital intensive. The things that government isn't good at is matching the rapid evolution of technology. And what's interesting is the kind of hierarchy of the storage, architectural hierarchy of the internet is changing, where stuff is getting pushed to the edge. So more and more people want to get out of the old centralized model of as low latency gets more and more important, to get away from that old cloud model. Remember, they used to have cloud. There used to be this thing called the cloud. That it was just like 3 or 4 years ago. But to get, start doing more things like caching on the edge. And if that happens, that's going to drive a lot of money into the exchange points, and they're going to need to be a lot bigger, because you're going to have people wanting to start having locating equipment on the edge. And I think for small regional ISPs, there might be money in that. So it's something to keep your eye on. But Reid knows more about this than I do. So
there's a problem that is caused when you have a lot of brand new, and not all of us have been in the business for a while, but when you have a brand new guy or gal who starts something in, let's just say, who cares? Let's pick New Hampshire, and decides that they're going to put fiber in the ground and build it to their local 1,000 homes, whatever we want to say. And they're going to go out and buy a 10 gig line, and they're going to go to somewhere where they can reach me or Cogent or NTT. Who cares who they're going to reach? Let's just say that they're going to go to reach one of them. That when they do it, and then the guy 10 miles away from them does it, or 30 miles away from them does it, and everyone else does it, those are not large enough for the caches or anything else to go to. They're too tiny. But what has to happen is somebody on the next level up, which, if you're talking about the government who's funding this, I'm not saying they have to dictate this. I'm saying that they look at it and they say, oh, well, we have 20 of these guys in a 90-mile radius. Let's go and collect them, and we can get them at this. I don't care if it's, a town hall or a community college or a regular college, or it doesn't matter. Any of those are fine. But to bring everybody in so that you end up with 10,000 eyeballs or 100,000 eyeballs coming into one place. And they don't have to all buy from the same carrier or anything else. But when you see that, we've seen it in Minneapolis, you start to see the large networks build towards that, because there's that gravity in that location. And if you don't have that gravity in that location, unless everybody decides to move to Maine for Fletcher or for Travis to Minnesota and the area,
both good places to move.
They are. I'm going up for blueberry season this year, but nonetheless, unless they do that, you're never going to get to that point, and you're always going to be building to whether it be an NFL city or the nearest place aggregation point. That's where you're going to be building to. And what I want to do is make sure that the aggregation points happen much closer to the edge, and that we end up with a ton more aggregation points. Because otherwise, when all this federal money disappears, someone's still going to be stuck paying the bill for these 100-mile 10 gig lines from some 1,000 home location. And those economics without that funding are going to break. But with an aggregation point that's only 10 miles away, that probably doesn't break anywhere. It doesn't break, or it's much easier to swallow.
Fletcher, I can't tell. Yeah, I was going to say, like, you're.
I agree. There are profound advantages to creating that sort of scale.
I can't tell quite if you're agreeing or disagreeing with your facial expressions. And Travis, I think, is just trolling Reddit to see if anyone's talking nice about him.
No, I'm just listening because what I'm pulling out of this is it's very different based on either state or locale, because the problems like we have in Minnesota here, Fletcher may not have out on the East Coast.
Well, do you mean Minnesota or do you mean Minneapolis when you say that?
Oh, I'm saying outstate Minnesota. If you want to start up a small ISP in outstate Minnesota, your middle mile cost, if you could even get your hands on middle mile, because it's probably owned by the incumbent, to get back to, let's say, Mice or to get back to Hurricane, you might need to have 1,000 or 1,500 users before you're even in the black. And that, I think, is a fundamental problem that is, at least that's what we face here in Minnesota. I mean, Fletcher might have ample fiber capacity that's carrier neutral. We just don't have that luxury here.
I feel like if Fletcher was out here, he might be thinking, well, like, I pick up this co-op, I go to that co-op, and then I'm close enough to the McLeod ring to like jump on that, and I'm there.
Yeah,
like,
I love that game. That's one of my favorite games. So I know
so that is your answer then.
Here, and they seem like they're cool. And the university, you always want to talk to the state university and any because colleges and universities they need a lot. They're in the same game. I mean, they have, and if you can figure out a way to leverage their scale. So say you got a university with a couple thousand students. That's a lot of there are a lot of content cachers who would like to get close to those, and the university needs lots of bandwidth. So co-ops, universities, it ought to be healthcare, but healthcare, those people are just so difficult to deal with. They just they really do not. They are very focused on their world, and they don't necessarily see the advantages of partnering. But there are lots and lots of different people you can partner with.
So let's talk then about Maine and my favorite issue, which is how we structure ownership of these things to make sure that forever and ever that they serve public benefits. Fletcher, you were intimately involved with creating the 3-ring binder, which aimed at really helping them really solve this problem in Maine, not all of Maine, but for a heck of a lot of Maine. And I feel like now 10 years later, there's a lot of benefits that came out of it, but I feel like maybe we left something on the table or there's lessons that we've learned.
Well, there are two things that were left on the table. One is the way the grant originally was written. It was supposed to be for both middle mile and last mile. So it's structured as 3 rings, which are 1,100 miles, covering covers the state of Maine. So there's most of the state doesn't have a middle mile fiber problem. And that's been real good for some rural providers. The other idea I had at the time is, so if we create a ribbon around the state, and the way that the population, the rural area is laid out is it's mostly along these what would seem small roads, but they're not like interstates, but Route 1 and rural Route 1. That's where the population is, and if you said everyone within a quarter mile of Route 1 could get a fiber connection, then it would prime the pump. People get used to having fiber connections. Everyone would want it. You can build out from there. And that local mile, the people who ended up building the network had decided not to do it. Do that, but the problem with, I think, is a classic public-private partnership problem, which the government invested the money. They put up 25 million, and the private put up private industry put up 7. But private industry that put up the 7 million ended up owning it 100%. And that meant their control over it was weak. the department of the government. This was during this is during the
it was the
financial
stimulus
crisis.
Yeah,
so the Department of Government had no experience in this. They had no staff to enforce the grant to make sure it was followed. And there were, so someone ended up owning, which it was a very lucrative middle mile network. And the original owners sold it for a lot of money to a Belgian company. And it's a pure commercial now. So it is, it has no law, even though the public paid for the vast majority, 80% of it, it's not run for the public benefit anymore.
If only there was someone that was really focused on making sure that we had things that were structured in a way that could continue to deliver public benefits. I don't know, that person would probably be really annoying.
What I get to, I think just the rule of thumb, whoever pays for it should control it. And the idea
the word control is actually like kind of brutal there, because like I can imagine us sitting here in a different scenario and being like, oh, can you believe the federal government won't let us do this? Can you believe like that we're dealing with that?
You have a monopoly on a key resource. I mean, the internet is just communities without it aren't going to survive. I mean,
so here's what I would like to see.
So you have a monopoly. Do you think you're better off having someone who owns it and can treat the local populace as if they're a natural resource to be exploited to its fullest extent?
Oh no, I'm totally with you on this. I mean, so my point is that you said who pays for it. I actually disagree, and I feel like I've given this some thought, maybe not enough, and this is probably not even the right avenue. So I'll keep this short. I won't go into my long spiel. Like, okay, so options. Federal government owns it. I don't like that, frankly. Like, I don't think they have a good sense of what to do with it and a variety of other issues.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with you.
State government. I think the state government ends up privatizing it, especially with the governors you've had. Like, I think that probably that. So what do you do with it? I say, make it a collection of counties or local governments owning it, so that it is almost impossible to privatize it, because you would have to get them all to agree on something. And there's one thing we know about a whole bunch of local governments in small towns and stuff like that. They never agree on anything. And so like, you're always going to have enough that are going to say, no, we're not going to privatize it, that it remains in public trust. Yeah. And we have other problems to deal with them. But I think that's the answer in my mind.
And there are a set of trade-offs. I mean, some places, municipal governments won't do a good job. There's every few months, there's a corruption, someone steals from the highway, the snow plowing fund up here, or every year or so. The other problem is these things really call out for economies of scale. And when there are needs for big technological upgrades, towns being able to figure that out is tough.
Right. Well, that's why they should own it.
But
they should own it and share it. And
it's a set of
manage it.
Yeah, it's a set of trade-offs. And to be clear, we're in the business of owning, financing, designing, building, and operating fiber networks. And our preferred way of doing it is to own them ourselves. But on the other hand, there's far more fiber out there than we're going to be able to fund, or anybody's going to be able to fund. And there are areas that just won't do it without government subsidy. And in that case, I feel pretty strongly that municipal fiber, I just think what's going on in Vermont is just absolutely fantastic. They have a really good story there. And it's hard to see how those towns aren't better off. The problem we have is in Maine, in Vermont, they're getting 30 towns together. And in Maine,
you're talking about the communications union districts.
Yeah, what I hate about Vermont is they had to call them CUDs. Just dumb puns. They get old. So yeah, Vermont has its CUDs, and but we in Maine we can't get towns to work with each other. I mean, it's just it just is really disappointing. But and New England has this thing because where we're all small town oriented, and I don't think counties are strong in any of the northern New England states or any of the New England states, not like other parts of the country. But if you had a place with strong county government rather than strong town government, doing it on the county level or multiple county level, and I think it would work really well. And there's lots of federal money coming oriented towards that potentially. There's $10 billion this round that's supposed to aim just at that sort of thing.
I'm not so sure that it'll be eligible for. It looks like it's eligible for connecting homes. I think there's a big question mark on whether or not you can use it for robust middle mile. It'll be up to states to interpret it, I think.
Yeah, I guess that's the case. That's interesting because I'm not sure. At least that's the read in some places around here. But the municipal network, particularly in government subsidized areas of the country and the rural areas, I think is got some real promise. Even though
we should have someone that was promoting this model, someone who is studying it, trying to understand it, generally answer people's questions about it.
Yeah.
Reid, have we more?
Oh, by the way, Chris, we're going to do a webinar on revenue bond.
We'll get you in a second, Fletcher. That's a first for us, Travis.
Yeah, there you go. It's usually my phone ringing.
He was heating up there. He was going to invite me to do something, I think. And Reid, you and I have gone back and forth on many different DMs about different things. And I'm trying to remember if we've more or less covered everything regarding middle mile. I mean, I think you've made the key points. I don't know that we've gone up and down all the alleys. Is there anything that you want to make sure we cover in the last few minutes of the show?
I think the most important thing to explain, even though you and I and Travis and Fletcher probably understand this, for those that are watching or watching this in 2-3 years when you're trying to start an ISP, the most important thing to do is understand that connectivity is multifaceted. And just because you do a fiber drop to somebody's house doesn't mean that their gaming is going to be fast or their FaceTime connections to whatever are going to be fast. Make sure that what you do, and this counts towards towns that are building municipal as well, make sure that what you do takes into account all of the pieces of an internet connection. And that's, be it an IX, a backbone connection, a place to home your connection, because if you go back to an aggregate spot, be it Albany or Springfield or Minneapolis or Kansas City, those spots are usually multi-home and are very well connected. So if you drop your connection at one of those, you're more bound to have different routes out of that building so that you're well protected as opposed to having a long line out. All of those things are what we should be trying to incentivize networks to do. And whether they be, if they're any competitive network, it's very important that we understand the way that the internet works, and whether they go with Hurricane or they connect to Mice or they go anywhere else, it's important to make sure that you're not just doing a drop for Comcast. You're not buying bandwidth from Comcast 10 miles away from where their nearest drop is and then building fiber off of that, because not that there's anything wrong, you're providing internet, but you're not actually providing anything other than an extension of whomever you're providing it for.
Fletcher, do you want to finish off your point? Going to talk about how you think. I think you're maybe going to ask me about sharing my wisdom with people that you care about.
Revenue bond finance municipal networks is what they ended up doing in Vermont, and I think it's a really good way for municipal. ValleyNet, who I think you know, the nonprofit ValleyNet that was the leaders in Vermont. A municipal bond company whose name I forget, and we are doing a webinar on that in the first week of June. You should, and I hope you'll listen in.
Yes, and we'll promote it if you send me a note about it.
I'll do that.
Travis,
It's being run by the Maine Broadband Coalition.
Oh, great. And which is a model. I think the Maine Broadband Coalition is one of the best statewide organizations, just tremendous, a lot of grassroots effort. Travis.
Go ahead.
No, finish up.
This legislative session, we may get a major significant a bill passed regarding pole attachments, which is the only way to build fiber in our state. And it looks like we may be able to get it to a model where there's a single pole administrator that is not an incumbent. Which
for people who aren't aware, there's more than a little granite underneath Maine.
Yes, and New Hampshire and Vermont.
Travis, one of the other things I was talking about with those, with the folks I was talking about latency was that I think you've had experiences with people that have transitioned to your network off of I guess it's now Lumen fiber, and people are like, wow, it's like it's better, and I think what Reid was talking about in terms of the whole network experience. I was wondering if you could talk about that briefly. Like, do you have people actually noticing a difference between a fiber to the home that is sure they're probably using a passive optical network, but I don't think that's the issue. The issue is the whole rest of the network.
Yeah, I think Reid brings up some very valid points that I think a lot of rural people maybe even really can't even take into consideration is, multiple ins and outs of your town, trying to get to the content. In our world, we try to feed content like out of Minneapolis, Omaha, Chicago. As Reid pointed out, Minneapolis, we've got our own, we've got our own identity now, but Chicago still has a lot of content. So if trying to get out of town,
say what that means. What does that mean?
Well, let's just take like a real basic thing, like Riot Games, right? They make video games, right? So we peer with them in Chicago, right? That enhances the gaming experience of their games, right? If we had to go across a transit provider to get there, it might be an additional few milliseconds, but that, believe it or not, that little differentiator. Another common one is having enough interconnect. A lot of guys struggle, and Reid could probably talk about this. When you get to these really big shops, do they have enough interconnect with YouTube, and do they have enough interconnect with Google? Do they have enough interconnect with Amazon? And, these are things we're constantly working on to make sure we stay ahead of the game. And then the other thing is
before you get to the other thing, you say enough interconnect. Does that just mean you're running it at too high it's too congested? You're running it at
more or less, yeah. So in our world, we design the network for Monday and Tuesday evenings. Or the that's when it's the busiest in our eyeball network, which is a term that everyone uses for end users, right? Netflix, YouTube, Hulu, etc. So if you make sure you have ample interconnect to handle that or handle big spikes in traffic, I don't know, Reid.
We talked right after Game of Thrones finally.
Yeah, the Game of Thrones denial of service attack, that was a big one.
iOS
releases are big. The NFL. The season finale for football, World Cup. See, these are the things you design your network for. The dirty little secret in our game is there's a lot of excess capacity the rest of the time. It's just when you have to design for those particular things. And then the thing with the internet now is it's not a nice to have, it's a necessity. If you're catering to gamers and you miss 4 or 5 pings, you're the worst company that's ever, existed on planet Earth. So you have to have redundancy in and out of your town. Like in Minneapolis, everything originally routed through the IX, what we call the 511 building here. We've been working for years and years to completely bypass that facility. So if there's an outage, we're not dead in the water. So there's a lot more to Reid's point, and I think a lot of the network operators understand, is you probably start out with one transit provider, and as you get bigger and bigger and bigger, you try to get as more and build, that old adage, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line in math. We try to do that with networks too. We connect to anybody that we can and try to bypass, get as many direct connections as we can to the content so that the end user benefits.
That seems like
end user. That's what I always say.
Like, why the hell wouldn't you do that? Like, why would an ISP be like, why do the work?
Well, because if, let's say, you're run by a private equity company who's only looking at the bottom line, let's say you're not, the people in charge are not network engineers, they may go, it's good enough, because it costs money to do this. It costs quite a bit of money to do this.
And there's a certain benefit to saying that everyone is a potential customer and therefore you're not going to peer. The attitude of certain networks out there is everyone is my customer, therefore I'm not going to give anything away for free, and peering is the antithesis of that. So there is that attitude out there with networks who run a very large network but don't peer with anybody.
Yeah.
Most people shouldn't be allowed on the internet.
Most of the names that you say, most of the big names you talk about, you don't generally peer with. You'll buy capacity from them. That's what you do.
So as we're wrapping up, Fletcher, is there anything else you want to share? Any other events you need me to promote? You're muted right now. No, we can't hear you.
Okay. I think we covered a lot of territory. This was really good.
Excellent. Travis, we did a good show finally.
Yeah, no, this was very
So where do I have to go on Reddit to say nice things about
Yeah. Look at my Twitter feed from last night. It was a tweet about how Jesse Harris, who is great. He's written about Utopia a lot over the years. He's in Utah, and he had said something about like so many people have Stockholm syndrome when it comes to their ISPs, like which is totally true. Like the bad ISPs, for some reason, people just take the abuse that they get, and we don't have to live like that. We can have good ISPs. So
you never go back. Once you've lived on fiber, you never move. I can tell you the people in New York who have FiOS are never going to move back to somewhere where they're on DSL or coax.
Which I think is an excellent segue. Thank you, Reid. I really like to promote that the 25.3 broadband definition from the FCC is ridiculous. So I want to make sure every show we say that so there's no misunderstanding. And I think if you're going to use federal funds to build networks, they should be fiber networks.
Yeah,
all right,
it's a huge waste of money. The digital divide is splitting society. But I mean, people who have access to technology, know how to use it, are getting more and more and more, and those who don't. And there's such a difference between being on fiber as the internet gets more and more important. Places that don't have it, they're just going to be on the wrong side of the divide. And the government oughtn't to be putting money into that.
There's a reason why we run fiber under the ocean and we don't put 5G towers between here in London and here in South Africa. And it's because you need fiber to provide 5G, and you don't need 5G to provide fiber.
Yeah. All right. That's a great another segue, Reid, because I just be careful. 14G. That's going to solve all problems. So actually,
I'm just going to call it an Infinity G, and I'm done. I beat you.
So I called. I sent Chris an article back about 20 years ago that said, "What was it like? Is the internet going to be here?" There was articles back in the day.
You sent me the article a few days ago, but it was about 20 years ago.
Basically that people are jumping off the internet, and this was the battle we used to work with financing partners back 20 years ago. The new battle is, well, isn't 5G going to do everything? If you pull that, no. Please use your dollars, buy as much fiber as you can, but not too much because I need some.
Yeah, don't stop investing in airplanes because teleporting is mentioned. This is so understand something, right? Like arguments that we thought were settled are coming out in full force right now in the federal government. The federal government is being lobbied heavily by CTIA to say, if you're going to spend money on broadband infrastructure in America, it has to be 5G. We can't lose the race to 5G. There's Richard Bennett is at it again, saying 70% of internet traffic, I think he's saying, originates wirelessly, which is to say that, right now I'm jacked in because I'm that kind of guy, but like most people are using Wi-Fi to get to their wired connection, but they're taking this talking point to then say it's ridiculous to do what Travis said. We should be investing in the cheapest thing, which is whatever AT&T wants us to do probably, and so we can make these jokes, but understand that
good people of goodwill in DC are being hit over the head with these talking points day after day, hour after hour, and they have to respond to them. So don't be surprised when the Biden administration does some things that are crazy by our eyes, because there are people who are making tens of millions of dollars to convince them to waste our money to prevent any threat to their monopolistic control of these markets.
100% of all vacations start with somebody walking to a car. Therefore, let's invest in sidewalks, and we won't do anything about airplanes or roads or anything else, because everyone starts with walking. It's right. The same thing. It's very important that people understand, and unfortunately, it seems like the internet itself as a not a conglomerate, but as an organization, doesn't have its own lobbying. The best we have is and I'm not complaining, is Vint Cerf, the father of the internet, to go out and talk. But still, it doesn't have the same je ne sais quoi as other things. And well, French, we're bilingual.
Now we're getting fancy here on the show.
Yes. Well, everyone else lives right next to the Canadian border, guys. So it's
I like that, because Fletcher kind of told one of our dirty little secrets here at the beginning of the show. Fiber is not as complicated as people think it is. So get out there, learn about it, and I sleep really well at night with a fiber network. Having a wireless network, oh god, that'll yeah.
If you look at, by the end of dial-up modems, the work that the just all the complexity that went in to converting analog to digital and then back again, and wireless is so difficult compared to fiber. Fiber is just really easy.
I remember having the arguments between token ring and Ethernet and who was going to win, and it feels like the same between wireless and fiber. So sorry, everyone, fiber's already won.
Yes, but at least it was a physical medium.
Yeah,
and look, you can't talk about redundancy and redundant paths when you're talking about fiber anywhere near the same as you can when you have a KMZ in front of you and you're or KMZ for those who aren't in the States, and you're looking at a map and you say, okay, I go down this street and not that street, and I go down here and not there. It's a mile difference. It's a world's difference, and it's very important that people understand that you've got to build a very important infrastructure. Something that I said to Chris a number of times is, you could build the nicest siding on a house, but if the framing and the inside walls and the foundation are not firmed up, it doesn't matter how beautiful the siding is, it's still going to collapse.
Yeah, the only place fiber doesn't work, though, there is one application. There's a few streets over in St. Paul, Minnesota, where it just doesn't work. So I'm not sure why. Yeah,
I'll fix it. I promise you.
Chris Mitchell Boulevard, that's like off limits right now.
Well, though it's interesting. I think that fiber does not work in any place that you want mobility, and we all want mobility. The model that everybody's using now is fiber as far as you can, and then wireless for the last hop. I'm sitting here talking to you using my laptop, and I have 100 a gigabit connection over there on the wall that I don't even bother to plug it in, and I'm just using wireless. We all use wireless inside our house, and the model you were talking about originally is how much better your wireless network got when you got fiber to the base station. So fiber is it's a beautiful marriage, wireless and fiber. It's just you want the fiber to go as far as you possibly can, because the closer you are to your radio, you want your fiber radio fed by fiber. The closer you are to radio, the better signal you'll get.
The other thing is, take a look at some of the places that, and I don't want to speak for our friends down under, the Australians, but take a look at some of the places that started the effort and then decided that it wasn't worth it halfway through. You can see that fiber to the home, fiber to the nearest tower, if that's what's necessary, is the best way of doing this. And we can discuss who should own it and everything else, whether or not the Australians owning the network, NBN and everything else worked. But nonetheless, they sort of gave up at the end and decided not to build fiber to every home. and every property, and you've got a lot of people who are stuck with fiber to somewhere down the road and their DSL to their house, and you still got that same problem. So we're all speaking the same thing: eat glass, not air. I think
we had a question that popped in, which we'll probably end with. Who speaks for the independent ISPs now? Is there like a trade association that you feel captures what you're trying to do?
For us, we think the best by far is Encompass. And also WISPA, and Encompass swings is kind of a more heavyweight, expensive, but kind of far more resources. Though one of the things about Encompass is they've gotten people like Google and Facebook have joined lately, which kind of like, what's going on with that? And WISPA is much more the small, oriented towards smaller organizations. And WISPA, and I think WISPA and FISPA, WISPA, and don't be fooled by WISPA. It's so many of the wireless people are doing fiber now. It's a natural segue for the traditional. So if I was just starting out, I'd start out with WISPA.
I like WISPA. I like a lot of things they do. I just worry about some of the bigger members of WISPA as well, who are now private equity controlled firms, and I feel like they are stepping on and screwing local members in many ways.
Yeah, no, that's the problem with all these organizations. Is it's a classic. Is you become popular, they essentially sell out. And yeah, I mean, as soon as someone becomes, one of these organizations becomes good, there is a tendency of the big people to step in, and all of a sudden you're saying, wait a minute, I thought they were the people we were organizing against. And I think there might be a little of that going on in Compass too.
The other thing is I don't know whether or not you want to talk about there being one organization, because there's so many different flavors of ISPs. Yeah. However, the thing that I can definitely say, and this is just to be memorialized, is if you're going to start an ISP, get on the NANOG mailing list, go to a NANOG trade show. Hopefully we're having them in person by the time that everyone's seeing this. Minneapolis is our first one in November in person. There's one in June that's virtual.
And that's NANOG.
North American Network Operators Group. Get on Reddit, get on mailing lists, talk to other people who are doing what you're doing. Look at PeeringDB, read the boards about the equipment that you're running, and find out what you're doing before you jump in, spend your money, and then try to do your homework. Don't buy the equipment and then watch the YouTube video. Watch the YouTube video and then decide what you're going to buy.
Right. NANOG is an amazing resource. All that I ask is that you read for at least a year before you post to the NANOG list. And remember, the people you're posting to are, there are people on there that have been doing this for 30 or 40 years and invented the internet. And don't make an idiot of yourself in front of your peers. And when you're spending something, it goes to thousands of people. So don't get in political discussions. But NANOG is great. It's free. It grew up with the internet. I got on it in like 92 or 93, and I think it had been around for a while. So it's an incredible resource. There's also the Fiber Broadband Association, and that tends to be more the equipment manufacturers. So as a new ISP, Fiber Broadband Association is an association of people that want to sell you things.
Used to be Fiber to the Home Council.
And Fiber to the Home Council is a really good one. Also,
well, that's what FBA is. That they changed their name.
Oh,
in North America.
Okay.
Unless I just totally made that up, but I'm pretty sure.
I think there might have been two different ones. I'll if there are notes to this afterwards, I'll send you one. My only complaint about them is you can learn an awful lot from them. There's an enormous because it's people who want to sell you things. It's equipment manufacturers and engineering companies and all that. sometimes it feels like I'm paying dues every year just to listen to a bunch of ads. But and there's also an awful lot of information there.
Great. Well, I really appreciate the discussion today. It's been fun. Enjoyed my middle mile 9 discussion.
Yeah.
It's Roman numeral 9, of course, not German for no. And I really appreciate the opportunity. Reid, thanks a lot. Fletcher, thanks for coming on.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Thank you.
Yes, we
Guys.
just got to come up with more topics. You got to badger me on direct message.
We can do it in person in Minneapolis.
Yes. Well, Fletcher just took off. Well, look at that.